And we're live. So, welcome to IIoT Live Lab here on Industry 4.TV, which is a weekly live show where we explore tools and technologies for building the connected factory. And today we're going to be discussing the topic of how to add analytics to a unified namespace with Flow software. And joining me today is Jeff. Jeff, I'll let you introduce yourself.
All right. Hey, thanks, Kuzai. Thanks for having me. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate it. I'm the president at Flow Software. My background was in time series data. I worked with Canary Labs on their historian for, I think, roughly about 7 years. And along that time, started to better understand the problems that manufacturers were trying to solve using time series data, and how important it is to bring not just time series data, but all different data into the analytics process. And that's when I got excited about Flow Software and have joined their team.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to come to the show today and share your insight with us. So, for those in the audience, if you've got any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We're going to address all the questions as we go along. So, without further more to do, I will hand it over to you, Jeff, to take it away.
Okay. Well, hey, thanks, Kuzai. So I'm really excited today. I've gotten to know a lot about MQTT over the last couple of years, working closely with HiveMQ, with the team over at the Sparkplug Working Group and the Eclipse Foundation. And MQTT is playing such an important part of our real-time data streams now inside of manufacturing, as does, of course, OPC UA and other real-time data streams, IIoT gateways and such. But the reality is, in order to do analytics, we need a lot more than just real-time data. Analytics is bringing together the real-time, as we call it, the now, as well as the before, what has been happening in all of the historic databases. And so Flow Software is an analytics engine that is purpose-built to help you take the raw data from the now, as well as the raw data from all of your historic sources, and bring them together to create that single source of truth that takes the very difficult steps of taking data and transforming it into information. So I'm excited to give you a quick overview of what Flow does, but mainly my goal today, Kuzai, is to take this concept of the unified namespace that really is the now snapshot of our operations, what is happening right now, current value, and adding to that the ability to talk about what has been happening and what is likely to happen from an analytics standpoint.
Awesome.
Yeah, so if I wanted to just in one slide lay out what is the process that Flow follows, it's taking all of those operational and enterprise data sources that are typically very rich in context within themselves, and giving you a way to inherit the structure and the data within each of those different sources. Bring that and apply your business rules, use filters and cleansing calculations to join data points from all of these different sources together. Then add a layer of context from both my calendar concept, what is a day, what is a shift, what is the patterns of our shifts, as well as from a production context. What product are we making? What state are we in? Then provide the mechanisms to do all of the aggregations and calculations that you need to create KPIs. Take all of that structure that we've inherited, those namespaces that we've inherited. Maybe it's all one nice, tidy, universal namespace. Maybe it's multiple namespaces or functional namespaces, and bring that together into a universal model that everyone can understand. Then share everything that's connected to Flow, all of the outputs that we've created, with your people and your applications, and do that on demand, do that on a trigger, do that on a schedule. Ultimately, if Flow knows about it, we want you to be able to know about it. So what does that actually mean? Well, it means that Flow becomes really good at helping your data tell a story. And there's lots of common ways that Flow gets used inside of operations to help do that. Everything from understanding true labor cost to scheduling, to tracking unscheduled downtime, to understand our adherence to our plan, maintenance KPIs around what type of machine hours or cycle count have we been running, how do we make a more efficient process, or how do we make sure that our quality is where we want it to be, calculating availability, performance, your OEE calcs, building really strong production reports that are sliced by all kinds of different calendar periods. These are all of the different things that Flow helps you do. And along the way, what you're really doing with all of this is you're creating benchmarks. You're looking across one line and comparing it to itself from previous period, or one line to another line, or a shift to a shift, or a site to a site. Really, Flow is that tool that we wanted to build so that whatever it is that you're trying to do inside of a foundational analytics solution, we wanted to be able to provide that for you. I heard it recently described by one of our partners as the gateway for operational analytics. This is where I go to connect and get everything that's been happening in my operation, and then be able to compare it across the board to other operations. So our ultimate goal here is to increase data readiness. Let's talk about the Unified Namespace, and I'm going to plug HiveMQ here. So if we have a Hive MQTT broker sitting in the middle of our UNS, all of my data producers, all of my data consumers are connected to the now. They are sharing information on as it is being produced. Maybe they're sharing data as it's being produced. There is some extra context that gets added that we might consider this information, right? I can throw some engineering units. The very structure of my naming, of my namespace gives me context. But what's missing from this, I'm losing this ability to bring in historical data as part of this as part of this current integration. So I'm not going to get a real-time stream of batches of historic data as I need it to calculate things like hourly numbers or daily, weekly numbers. It can be difficult to maintain a single unified namespace on a brownfield project, or I've done a large greenfield project and then all of a sudden I acquire an asset and it no longer fits. Of course, I can change that. Sometimes that is absolutely what I should do. I don't know. Can we always do that? Possibly, maybe not. Great examples of what is a unified namespace, as I mentioned, HiveMQ or an MQTT broker. HiByte does a great job of extending a unified namespace. Cogent Data Hub, another one that comes up a lot. Okay, but this is just the now. Analytics, like I mentioned, requires history. And so often what ends up happening is in order to do analytics, we need to start doing a bunch of point-to-point integration work to connect to an MES database, to an ERP system, to a data historian, to a SCADA system. And this is exactly what we wanted to avoid. That's why the unified namespace was born. Right? We don't want all of this messy point-to-point connectivity that we have to manage. This is how we get a ton of technical debt. And let's be honest, it's never as easy as just drawing a line across the page. There's a ton of work that goes into all of these integrations. So we know the right solution. The UNS has shown us that a hub-spoke model makes it really easy. And that's what Flow wants to provide. So our goal is to be the hub of an analytics solution by being that engine. We are calculating all of the necessary building blocks for the analytics, and we are publishing that back out to all of the consumers. So a producer and a consumer can be the same. And in doing this, we're also able to build a library of our integration work, or the rules behind the calculations that you're running. So it's one place where we can apply our business rules, and we can make sure that we're on the same page as an organization about how we define these KPIs that are so crucial for our operation. The producers that we are typically connecting to, as I mentioned, data historians are a huge part of this. Our MES solutions, ERP solutions, your maintenance, your lab or quality solution, all of the different flavors of SQL that you might also want to get information from. And what's nice is everybody's operation has got that specialized system that's just in this process, right? Maybe it's a checkware or some other specialized that you wouldn't see in other processes. Almost always there's a SQL database behind those. And so by catering for all the different flavors of SQL, we can almost connect to anything that way. And then there's the real-time feeds, the MQTT brokers, the OPC servers, Kafka, IoT gateways. And that final caveat that always gets forgotten in the manual data entry. How do we get our operators, our frontline workers, how do we get them to be able to put data into these analytic systems that typically is getting missed or might be getting keyed into an Excel file? Those are the producers. The consumers, anything that's a producer could also be a consumer. So we are always going to be able to deliver on a round trip back. Constantly, we get this concept of data syncs. Other applications, other databases that want to have these calculations, this cleansed data delivered on schedule or delivered on trigger. So machine learning models, and other analytics applications, maybe something like a Seek, data warehouses, tooling in AWS or Azure, back to the MQTT broker, which we'll show today, our Kafka streams. Of course, a REST API, always important so that I can get it on demand. And then how do I share this information to my people? Slack, Microsoft Teams, where are they currently already consuming this data and sharing information? Email, SMS, and then Flow also has a dashboarding tool, HTML-based dashboarding tool. That's quite nice. So again, it's this concept of a hub, but we don't want to exclude everything that's already been built inside of the UNS. And so we make it really easy to do a bi-directional piece of connectivity back to the UNS. So what we hope to show today is that as we're creating a new insight inside of Flow, we're going to just turn around and publish it right back over to our UNS so that if it's a minutely or an hourly KPI, it's always available as it's updating. But there's components inside of the UNS that are also potential producers and consumers inside of Flow. So it's not just about connecting the two hubs, if you will. It's also about allowing a secondary application, in this case, a data historian, to be able to say, I'm going to get my real-time data from the UNS, and I'm going to allow my historical data to get shared over to Flow, or what we know it as the Unified Analytics Framework, the UAF. And then at the same time, if I look in the top right, this analytics application that is subscribed to the UNS for the now also wants to get a bunch of data from Flow so that it can, maybe it's a machine learning model. So it has the capability to take its output and push it right back into the UNS. And at the same point, if we look over at the far right-hand side of the screen, if there is a database that is connected to Flow, that means that anything else that's connected to Flow can ask Flow for the raw data that's living inside of that connected database. So Flow acts as a pass-through and will create, or gives you the ability to say, hey, I need 30 days of data from this database that Flow knows about. Be the broker for me in handing off that historical data package. And so Flow is that directory service as well. So in all, what we're doing is we're supporting two different functional namespaces. What might be a now plant namespace, as well as your analytics reporting namespace. And together, we're expanding the definition of the unified namespace.
Yeah, that's interesting. So maybe if I can kind of like quickly jump in there, Jeff, with a question. So is this maybe a question of, say, you've got one participant of the unified namespace that perhaps needs uh, to get transactional data, like say what was the hourly rate of production in the past hour, and that information is of relevance in the now in the unified namespace. So to get that information, that component would connect to Flow, get that hourly information, and make sure that the unified namespace is always up to date with that fresh information. Is that
exactly? That's exactly right. So those crucial calculations and those run rates, those averages, mins, maxes, counts, those things that is the baseline of analytics. So we need to be able to easily serve that back into the UNS, and that's our mission at Flow.
cool? Okay.
And Kuza, I think I'm at a spot where I'm about ready to just demonstrate how this works, but I need a good data source for a real-time data source. And I bet you can help me out with that.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, sure. So first of all, what we're going to show you here is the broker. So I've got it. I'm generating some data from for a unified namespace, publishing it to a HiveMQ MQTT broker, and the broker that we're using is a HiveMQ Cloud serverless broker, which I'm going to kind of like quickly show you how you can get started with that. It's a free version that allows you to connect up to 100 devices. So when you get to the HiveMQ website at hivemq.com, you simply go to get HiveMQ, and then you see I've got two options here for either HiveMQ Cloud or HiveMQ, and then you can quickly sign up without needing to enter a credit card information there. And when you sign up for the first time, you'll notice that a broker cluster is already created for you. So all you need to do is simply go into the broker, and then you can find all the connection details there. So I've already shared these connection details with Jeff, and I'm already publishing data to it. So we're going to see Jeff then generating some analytics off of that data. And then, of course, you're able to kind of like create some access management policies here, and then also assign some permissions as to what you want that client to be able to do. So we've got data flowing into the broker now. So I'll hand it over to you, Jeff, to then show us what you've got on your side.
Okay, great. So this is the Flow Config tool. The Flow Config tool has two different menus. It has a left menu. It has a right menu. The left menu is where I'm going to build my model. It's also where I do some basic types of system work. Over on the far right menu is where my data sources and my data consumers, so who I read from and who I send data out to, is where they live, and I configure them. It's also where I do some advanced things like building templates. So I won't have time to probably in our time today to demonstrate a template, but I want you to know that what we're building today, I'm building manually. Of course, for scale, we want to be able to do this in the form of templatization. And so a flow template allows me to take a model that I've built. If for our bottling line, I want to have these 10 KPIs, I'm able to take that model once I build it and deploy it as a template for as many lines or as many instances as I need to. And I can code in the tag naming logic that I've used, whether it's in my historian or my broker, so that I don't have to go link my data sources inside of each instance of my template. So it can become a very nice, scalable, automated feature. Today, you're going to see me do it manually because I'd like to also treat this as if you wanted to try out Flow for yourself, you should be able to use today's demo as a building block example. In the dead center of my screen is really my workspace. This is where I'm going to build out these calculations and KPIs. And the last thing to just talk about is this bar here is what we call the flow zone. Each of these icons represent a different piece of my model. So folder structure, metrics, where I build out what it is that I want to measure. I templatize a metric, basically. And then this concept of hey, here's a tag in Flow, and these are the different measures, time-based KPIs periods that I'm going to use. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is let's show everyone how you would connect to an MQTT broker. So over here on the right-hand menu, I've got tabs across the bottom. This is my integration tab, and I have my data sources currently being shown. If I right-click on data source, it gives me the ability to pick a new one. So I'm going to come down to MQTT. And notice that it's called MQTT Buffer. I don't know if you saw it said beta before I clicked on it. I'm running a beta version of Flow today that should be released in the next 2 weeks. So this is Flow now running in .NET 6. That means that I'm no longer restricted to just a Windows environment. I could run this in Docker. I could run this in Linux. So I say all of that to say that the MQTT Buffer is a fairly new piece for us. What it does is quite unique, though. It takes the real-time tags that we discover at the broker, and it starts to historize them inside of Flow. Now, Kudzai, Flow is not meant to replace a historian. Historians are the backbones of analytics, but there's a lot of tags that hit a broker that are not getting historized that you might want to capture 7 days or 3 weeks of data for. Flow can hold that for those shorter periods of time so that we can then use that raw data for our calculations and our analytics. And that's what I'm going to demonstrate today. So if someone is trying to get started with MQTT or Hive instance, this is a great way to add on to that and get some extra value relatively quickly and easily. All right, you've created 2 different namespaces. You have a namespace called Berlin and you have a namespace named Munich, correct?
Yes.
Let's call this one Munich. I've left myself a cheat sheet for the address. There we go. We are secure. Sparkplug B is what we are using. This is secure. I need to add my local certificate information. Type it right, and then I'm going to subscribe to the Munich. Now, the SPBV 1.0 is already a default when I select Sparkplug as my protocol, so I don't need to re-enter that. I do need, though, to subscribe to a group ID. I can't just wildcard everything. We do that as a precaution because remember, we're buffering this. So everything that's inside of Munich, when I do this, is now going to become buffered and historized inside of Flow. All right, so that's now sitting here. And within Flow, if I hover over that, the little colored disk beside it, the red disk says, hey, there's something that's not been done yet. I need to actually assign this data source to my Flow platform. Left menu at the bottom is where that systems deployment menu is. So basically, I just need to drag this and say, hey, make it an official data source inside of Flow. And then I deploy everything. So right click, if I see a green disk, that means I haven't deployed something yet. And now we're deploying Munich. So I'm going to let that go and run. I've already connected to Berlin, same exact setup. And here is the namespace that I have now inside of Berlin. When I look at this Berlin namespace and I browse it, I can see there's group ID, edge ID, there's my device. Then you've created a folder inside of the device called edge, and there's my tags. Mixer level, temp inlet, temp suction, and this is all just nonsense data, right? This is just simulated data. A double click on my mixer level. Notice doesn't just show me a real-time value. I connected to this about 30 minutes ago, and it started historizing when I connected to it. So the beauty of this is I've got history and I've got the now value. So there is the mixer level. Let's look at the temp inlet, and let's look at the temp suction. Okay, that's my raw data. Now I'm going to start my model on the left side, click on the model tab at the bottom. I've got some models I've built previously. Let's create a new one for today. It is the Kudzai fan club model.
Great name.
I thought so too. All right, so I'm going to start with a metric. Now, I want to start this with the end in mind, meaning, remember, my goal is to build something that I publish back to the unified namespace. Within Flow, a metric is treated as our device ID. So I need to keep that in mind. So my metric here is going to represent line 1, because that's the unified namespace that we've created. So this is line 1. And then inside of that, I want to represent a couple of these tags. So the easiest way I can do that is that this top bar is my default settings. And so for each of my different types of tag or measure, I can create default settings. This one, I'm going to just create a unit of measure. So we'll call this % as my default unit of measure. Now, all I have to do is drag this mixer level and drop it on top of that metric. It inherits the tag name as was defined in my model. So remember, I said Flow is going to inherit both the data and the structure. And now I, inside of my Flow system, have this concept of a mixer level. If I double click on it, it's now loaded in my workspace. And there's all of the history for my mixer level. I can change my history periods. Of course, I'm not going to get anything previous to when I started when I attached or when I subscribed to the broker. Lost my English for a second, Kudzai. But I've got everything since I've subscribed to the broker. Now, because all of the majority of the KPIs and measures that we're going to create are going to be time interval based, I need a calendar service that is going to manage my concept of time. If I come down to my toolbox, that's what I have here in calendars. So right now I have 4 different calendars that I've been using. I have a production calendar. I can create a custom calendar for Berlin. So if I look at this custom calendar, I can say for Berlin, my year starts in January. My work week starts, we consider Sunday as day 1. What time on Sunday does my day start? Starts at 6 a.m. And when I talk about minutely KPIs, do I want 1 minute? Do I want 5-minute KPIs, 15? What's my smallest building block of time? Typically, organizations are using 5 or 15-minute KPIs. For our demo today, because we don't have a lot of history, it's just since I subscribed 30 minutes ago, I'm going to use minutely so that we can demonstrate these different time slices a little easier. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and right-click and make that my default for the rest of our demonstration. That way I don't have to select it each time. And this mixer level is now ready for me to use. So I could just drag this over to the minute KPI and release it. And what I would have here would be a 1 minute, maybe I just want to know the average. So all I will do is double click on it. And now I can start to configure how I'm going to slice that tag into 1 minute buckets. The very first thing I do is I look at my retrieval section. Each of these expand. Now I know from my experience that retrieval is where I need to go. And I need to pick the aggregate that I want to use. Am I looking for a min or a max? Is it a totalizer tag? I need a counter, which, by the way, we handle the reset periods. That's so important for totalizers. Do I want a range from the min to the max? Do I want a delta from first to last? Do I just want first? Do I just want last? Do I want a standard deviation? Do I want a time and state? All of the standard aggregates that you need for the building blocks of your analytics. I just need an average. We'll make it easy. And I'm going to backfill everything. I don't want to default my backfill to July 23rd because I don't have data there. So I'll come up here to my defaults. As I'm building this new, I'm only going to be defaulting to, let's just say 10 a.m. system time. No, my system time is different. So we'll just say 8 a.m. system time. All right, let me make that match. Perfect. We'll set it and deploy it. Notice that it's not deployed yet. It's got the green disk that's saying, hey, Jeff, you've configured your measure. You haven't actually done anything. I can deploy it here, or I could right click on it over here. Notice that the deploy status follows the whole way up. That means if I've dropped a measure into my folder that's not deployed, I could just deploy from the highest level. I don't have to go searching through all of the tree. So it is now deployed. The flow calculation engine now says, okay, go back to 8 o'clock, take all of the data that we've been storing internally in memory, slice it into 1 minute averages, write it into the flow database. So now this measure is available in the flow database and I can do something else with it. All right, now that's just the raw data. I may not want to use just the raw data. So let's do this. Let's take that same tag, mixer level, and let's drag it back over on top of the metric. And this one we are going to call mixer level cleansed. So I've got a bunch of windows open. I'm just going to close them all and start fresh here on cleansed. So I've got my raw data sitting here, and I've got some peaks that I might want to take out of the data before I start using it in my calculations. In fact, it looks like, Kudzai, this level is at -118. I don't think that's possible.
Yeah.
So let's clean this up. When I create these rules, I am going to want to basically say, hey, on this rule, we are going to take that mixer level cleansed and we are going to make it a calculation. And you know what? I've already made a slight mistake. I didn't need to bring this over a second time. Let me pull that out of there real quick. All I needed to do was take it here where it already is living and drag it down onto my calculation icon. And what that's going to do is take this tag and give me the capability to cleanse that data. There we go. That's what I wanted to do. Okay, so now there's my raw data. And here in Retrieval, I now have a place to bring in other tags and a place to write some expressions. I do want to add some other tags to this because I want to do more than just eliminate the peaks that are beyond what I know they should be. I want to also bring in some state or some fault awareness. So let's look at Canary. I'm connected to a Canary instance. Let's browse for a Canary tag. I've been generating some tags for the last couple of days for this demo. Here I've got a mixer state. So if I bring mixer state, same thing. I just drop it on top of my line 1. I inherit the structure as it's been named inside of my historian. Now I don't need all of that, so I will shorten that. And now I have a tag called mixer state as well. So that mixer state tag, I want to bring down into my retrieval. So now I've got 2 tags that this calculation is aware of. Let's build a rule. This is all C#. So all I need to say is, look, if mixer state, let's take a quick look at it. What is the raw data of mixer state? Okay, so mixer state is either a 1 or a 0. I'm going to trim out all of the 0 periods. So we'll start by saying mixer state equals to 0. That's the case. And actually, if it's equal to 1, I'll keep it. So let's say if that's the case, then write mixer level. If not, we're going to write null. I have the capability to validate and then say refresh this data. Okay, so look here, I've lost this data because this is my state 0. If I back this up just a bit, let's go, well, let's go to 940. There's the previous period where it was also state 0. But my negatives are still there. So let's add to that. We'll do an and. Mixer level is greater than 0. That should knock out that peak, which it just bottomed out at. So now the lowest number is only at 0 the whole way across. And what are these high numbers? It probably can't be higher than 100.
Yeah.
Or we're in trouble, right? So let's go ahead and add that in as well. Less than 100. Okay, great. Now I feel good about this. Now I've got a tag that I want to build off of. Perfect. So now I can take this tag and I can start dropping this tag onto my minutely numbers. And here I'm looking more, I don't want the average. Let's say here I'm looking for a 1 minute range. Remember, all I do, go into Retrieval, switch the aggregate, make it a range, and deploy it. So now I've got a 1 minute range. If I want that to be a running hour, I can just drag it right back on top of the minute, and now I'm getting my hour to date. I want to label that as a range. I don't want it nested, so just like any tree view, I'm going to drag it up a folder or drag it up a branch, and now they're side by side. So what do we have? Let's deploy it. Everything's now deployed. If I look at my 1 minute range, every minute when I had good data, I have a value. When I didn't have good data, I have a null. There's the table view of it. Notice that there's the capability of versioning. So one of the neat things with Flow is that we have the capability to rerun these calculations over and over and over again. If underlying data sources change, we rerun a calculation. If canaries in store and forward mode, we hold our calculations until the data arrives. If at the end of the day, you want all of your calcs reran just to make sure that late data or some type of situation that hasn't been accounted for, if there's a new value, we will version and we will keep the original value as well. Okay, next piece to do, Kudzai.
Yeah, maybe before you jump into that, I just want to kind of like find out. So now we've got missing data there. So like typically, how would that be handled? Maybe if it's if you are going to export that to a system or push it to a system where that data is required, are you able to fill it with dummy data or maybe some average? All those missing gaps, are you able to kind of like maybe put an average or something?
Yeah. So if I wanted to, let's look back at this cleansed rule. I could take this cleansed rule, and that's where I would actually make that. So the reason it's null is because I told it to be null.
Yep.
Okay. Now, what if I had said, what I wanted to do here was to use the 1 minute average. I have to undeploy it first. 1 second. Oh, it's not deployed. What am I doing wrong, Kudzai? Bring it in here. My own technical limitations, sir. I can, let's see, why am I on the wrong tag? No, I'm on the right tag. Right now, Lenny's watching this and he's saying, Jeff, no, you do this. Yeah, I know why. Because I'm in a tag role looking at tags. 1 second. Let me do it this way. Let's bring in mixer level. This tag is going to be created to be a manual tag. Just have to change it real quick. It shouldn't be replicated. It needs to be a manual tag. Let me do it this way. Pressure's on me now. I have to make sure I do this for you. I was so close. I can feel Lenny yelling at me saying, Jeff, you're there.
Yeah.
Hold on. There is a little icon that I need here. And let's bring this source. No, it's not that. I might have to come back to you on the exact how to do it, Kuzai.
Yep. That's okay.
But what I do is I pick up basically what I need to do is I need to take this 1 minute average and make it like, there it is. That's what I wanted. Okay. So now my 1 minute average is linked as a tag.
Okay.
Let me clean this up. When in doubt, drag and drop. That's what I always have to remember. Okay. So there that is. Now I should be able to come into this role and take this piece and drop it in, which now I can. So instead of null, write the value that represents the previous 1 minute average.
Nice.
So yeah, so how do you want that to play out? You get to set those rules. And that's the beauty of this tool is that you're applying your organization's business rules in a universal way so that no matter what the data source is that I'm connected to, and no matter where I'm publishing, everybody's getting the same version of the truth. And that's the value behind this. Hey, thanks for your patience in letting me figure that out. It's amazing when the camera's on, and it's live, the way that your brain gets in the way. Now I do need, if I want to update that, I need to come back in because I've changed that, and I just want to trigger that to rerun. That way we have that data. Next thing to do, let's get this back into our UNS. Okay.
Perfect.
I need to create a data consumer. This is my publish engine. So we'll do new. We're going to do MQTT. There's my broker. I'm sending this back to Berlin. Sparkplug B. What is the group ID? Group ID is Berlin. What is the node ID? Bottling? Right? Yeah. Now we test it. Success. Save it. Come back down to our left menu where our system deployment is. And I don't have a data consumer yet. So that means I just need to drag what I've just built and drop it on my platform. It builds the consumers. All I have to do is deploy it. So now that's deployed. And now I have this capability to take my integration of this mixer 1 minute range cleansed. So let's take a look at it. It's processing, still processing. But all I need to do now is take my calculation has not yet been validated. Okay, 1 second. Always pay attention to your flow notes. See that little colored disk? That told me I had something wrong. And because of that, now this will properly process. Good. It's processing and it'll be ready for me in a second. While that's doing that, all I need to do is take the data consumer, drag it, drop it underneath of Berlin production, and then to give it the path that I want. Now you're publishing your real-time data to a folder called Edge. I'm gonna publish to a metrics folder, and let's call this this is mixer level. I could note that it's cleansed. In this case, we're just going to assume, and this is a 1M range. Cool. Maybe I don't want to create a tree, so we'll just underscore it. Okay, deploy this, and now that's going to publish, and it will do it every 1 minute when there's a new calculation. So I won't get it right away. I'm only going to get it after the minute has passed. I need to set that and backfill, I believe. Let's make sure I'm getting this to you. 9. There it is. All right, so now it's backfilling. I'll have all of my data here in just a second. And then on the turn of the next minute, you're going to pick up the latest value from that calculation.
Nice.
I can watch this with MQTT FX, which, by the way, is another nice thing I can pick up on that HiveMQ cloud instance that's free. I use it all the time. Let's come in and, oh, did I just get my first change? Nope. Let me come in and subscribe to what I want first. Line 1, and I said metrics, right? I want metrics, and we're now subscribed to that. Unsubscribe to the others, and within a minute, we should see it come in here. Other things that I can do. How are we on time? We've got a little bit of time left.
Yeah.
I'd like to show just quickly how I can also do a projection into the future.
Okay.
I don't have quite enough history yet from our Berlin model to do that, but if it's okay, I'd like to use a tag that I have sitting around in my historian for this. So if I look in my historian, I have this concept within the historian of a bottling factory as well. Let me look at side of my packaging, filler, product supply totalizer. Cool. I'm going to bring this into my line and just pretend like it's our totalizer. All right, so this totalizer, when I look at it, has been running and running. And if I look back a couple days ago, I can see that I've got nonstop history. I want to understand what this totalizer is doing per day. So I'm going to drag it and drop it on top of the day. I want to make sure that I had the totalizer, did I? Yeah. Drag and drop it on the day. And there's my totalizer, and this is now my daily. This daily, I need to use a counter on. I want it to look at the beginning of the period, at the end of the period, take the difference, and if it resets, account for the reset in that totalizer. This I'm going to backfill a couple days. Let's see if I can get the whole way back to the 30th if I have enough history for that. And we'll let it do it, and it'll do its piece. Now, as that's doing its piece, I need to establish a run rate for this totalizer. So in order to do a run rate, I'm going to look at the last 3 hours. So I'm going to take that totalizer, I'm going to make an hourly. Same thing, counter. I could have started here before I went to the day. Probably didn't backfill far enough yet again, so we'll go to the beginning of the day on that. And all right, now this hourly, I need to take the average for the last 4 hours and use that as my run rate. So I'm going to take this hourly, drag it to the calculator, and this will be my 4H run rate. Retrieval, there's that hourly. Now I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to take that measure and I'm going to adjust the properties on it. And I'm going to tell it, instead of using the current period, which it has been doing, the current hour, I want to look at a range. And I want to shift that range by 4 hours. So notice that over here, when I do that, I pick up a offset in my time periods. So the reason it's 4 is because I'm on an hourly measure and I'm wanting to look backwards 4 hours to now. So -4 to now. Bring it in. I'm no longer looking at a value. I'm now looking at values. So this is an array of 4 values. And I'm going to tell it to take the average. Validate that. Again, I'll backfill this back to 0. It's set to a date that is before any measure calculations. Yes, I'm aware of that, and that's okay. Let's see if this one has already gotten there ahead of me. Perfect. So every hour, from 9 till 10, from 8 to 9, from 7 to 8, I have a value that represents the hourly total. And now on this one, I'm going to deploy, and it is going to look now -4 hours, now -4 hours, now -4 hours, and give me a new run rate. Okay, last thing to do. I want to know where I'm going to be this time tomorrow. Okay. So let's project. So this is a 24-hour projection. On this 24-hour projection, I'm going to say, look forward 24 hours based on the run rate and tell me, where am I going to be in 24. Now I have shifted time forward based on the run rate that's been established, based on my actual production that is constantly being updated. And as that run rate is updated, so will my projection of where I'm going to finish my day be updated. I know, it's still waiting for the other one. Okay, so it's deployed. Everything's now deployed. And let's see if our run rate's been established. Almost. There we go. Current run rate, current period, 2278. Previous period, I don't have it. I don't have the history for it, but that's okay. My projection is still going to get there for me. And there it is. So it's telling me where I'm going to end up into the future. Blue is future state. And even though I only have a little bit of history, I can see 2 different values of where my history is telling me I'm going to be. Hey, let's share it back to the namespace. And so just like that, we path it, we tell it metrics, and we'll call this production prod projected. Deploy it, and off it goes. Okay, I'm curious if anything actually came back in from my system. Let's take a refresh and look.
Yeah, that's super interesting how you can actually introduce that kind of context of having a projected a figure within the unified namespace, because it kind of like really changes the whole contextual awareness of the system, right?
Right. Now, I haven't actually published this yet. I think I might have, as part of my little beta world here, I think I might either have something configured incorrectly, or I just haven't, I'm not seeing actually where I have birthed on this topic with metrics. So I might have a little debugging on my side to do, but I think for the concept point, I hope, again, I am on beta. I hope that it does prove the point. I'm connected, but maybe we'll see it show up in a bit. Any questions about this or anything that we can clarify that might have come in?
Yeah, I think we've got one question here.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think they're asking about what is the difference between functional namespace and OPC unified namespace?
Yeah, that's a great question. So typically, the unified namespace has a lot of operational specific knowledge encoded into it, right? A temperature sensor is TT001, and it's tied to loop 3 on line 1. Well, that's great if I work in that operation. I understand that. And that is probably what my unified namespace is using, or some version of that. But when that data travels outside of my factory, and that data needs to arrive at enterprise for a data analyst to work with it, what's the chances that they're going to understand that naming convention? So the idea of a functional namespace says that we inherit the site functional namespace, and we give a way to abstract that for a information model or a reporting model functional namespace. So are we calling the same? We're still referencing the same point, but the real-time point that was referenced as TT001, by the time it makes it to enterprise, is no longer a raw data point, because it is represented as a raw data point here using the functional namespace. But as I create a 1-minute average of it, I'm calling it, or a daily average of it, or a min-max, or range, I'm calling it temperature boiler line 1. And that's how it's being referenced from the enterprise. So it's not changing the UNS. It's just recognizing that there's 2 different languages that we speak. One we speak in operations, the other we speak at an enterprise level. And I don't have to do that, right? I could keep it the exact same. This caters and allows for me to be able to abstract different functional namespaces. So if I have 2 plants and they're not actually speaking the exact same language in their namespace, I don't have to stop a plant and change everything. I could actually cater for that. Great question.
Awesome. Thank you so much for answering that, Jeff. So to our audience, if there's anyone else who's got a question, please feel free to drop it in the chat. I think we've just got just over a minute before we end things here. But otherwise, in the meantime, thank you so much, Jeff, for taking the time to come through to the show and demonstrate the capabilities of Flow software to enrich the unified namespace with analytics. That's really a powerful way, really, of adding context into the unified namespace. And also, thank you for clarifying because that's literally one of the questions that I had. What is the does Flow software replace a historian? What is the difference between Flow software and historian? I think you kind of like really covered that question really well.
Thank you, Kudzai. And one of the common questions that we get about historians in Flow is, hey, my historian allows me to do some calculations in event periods. Why would I do it in Flow and not just do it in the historian? And so I will just give 3 most common answers for that. Number 1 is that Flow gets a ton of its context from non-time series data. So how do we actually frame the time series data and slice it? Well, we do it by data that's not time series. We do it based on batches and product runs and personnel records and all of these other things that historians don't typically cater well for. So we want to be able to slice it by all of the different data sources. Second is that Flow, I mentioned it, is really good at batch. So because we're really good at batch, and that's usually a very expensive application to try to bolt onto your historian. And then the third is that I get a layer of independence from my historian brand. So if you think about this, if I took this line 1 model and duplicated it and created a line 2. So line 2 could be tied to a completely different historian. The underlying data source doesn't matter to us at Flow. What's great is I'm still running the same calcs. I'm still outputting the same names. And if somebody hits the Flow API and says, I would like the raw data for mixer level cleansed for line 1 and for line 2 for the last 7 days, Flow goes to those 2 different brands of historian and asks for that data and hands it off via the Flow API. So I'm creating a reporting standard and a common API request point independent of the underlying data sources.
Makes perfect sense. Awesome. So Jeff, again, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you to our audience for joining us. Remember, we do this every week. So join us next week again as we explore different tools and technologies for building the connected factory. So with that, we've come to the end of this show. Thank you so much and have a good night and a day.